Hello everyone, my name is John O'Roach from Fight Like Fiore. It's great to have you here for video 3 of my workshop. Today we'll be looking at using a curriculum. In this video what I wanted to do was outline how you can develop a structured training program to help. So if you're confused about how all the components of sparring fit together, and most importantly what goes into building a successful training program, then this is the video for you. In video 1 we looked at the basics of footwork and how much of a foundational skill those really are. And then in video 2 we built on those skills and applied them to Fiore's universal defense. So you've got simple skills of footwork or foundational skills of footwork, and then starting to build on those to put them into an applied defense. So if you've not seen those two first videos, go back, take a look at them, and then come back here to get you up to speed with where we've been progressing in this series. Today I wanted to build on what we discussed there by seeing how to break apart a complex skill set into a series of component pieces and then tie all of those bits together and build on each collection of strands and tie them all together into a cohesive whole. And the principles that we're talking about when you're using a curriculum can be applied regardless of any style that you're using or any school that you're practicing inside. So they're just principles to use. They're not necessarily hard and fast set of rules as to this is how you should structure all things, but it's a concept that we're pushing around here. And if you're working with a curriculum, it will really help you push through any of your training plateaus and develop a great deal of clarity in how to progress onto the next stage of your sparring and really improve things generally. Because sparring is a very complex skill. There's lots and lots of different things all happening at once at very high speed, and it's very easy to be overwhelmed. So if you've got a curriculum, then regardless of what your skill level is, this will help you progress. You've got to have a plan which can identify where you are, it can define where you're trying to get to, and it maps out a clear pathway as how you intend to get there. That's really what a curriculum is. That's what it's designed to do. So let's take a look at how you use a curriculum. In choosing a curriculum, the very first thing that you need to understand in yourself is, what are my objectives? And a lot of people will say, I'm here to improve my sparring. Duh. This answer is not a sufficient answer in and of itself. It's an ill thought out answer, because if you're studying, for instance, grappling, or if you're studying small sword, or if you're studying tournament fighting, these are all very, very different things. Despite the fact that they're all improving my sparring, they really have little to do with each other at all. They just sort of come under this broad umbrella of HEMA training, but essentially they're quite different styles. There's a degree of overlap, but they're fundamentally very different things. So you need to be very specific in saying, what are my particular objectives, and then either work with or design or somehow find yourself using a curriculum which will produce those results. All right, so a curriculum is simply a measured pathway to a very specific point. It's not just to help you spar better. That's not good enough. You need something a lot more precise and a lot more particular in the definition that you're trying to use. Because otherwise what will happen, and I found it, here's an example that I saw recently and I thought it was very interesting. Two people were fighting. You could see by the way they moved against each other that it was a fairly regular class and just a regular sparring session of the class. They closed in on each other. They were tangled in the bind. One kicked the other, broke his position, and then cut him down. Classic Fiore stuff. I was really impressed. I thought it was great. But others violently disagreed. They thought it was uncontrolled, dangerous, lacked communication, and a whole host of other complaints. And these confusions happen because people have different objectives. They're not just going about being better at sparring. They've got completely different objectives in how their sparring will improve and what the end goal is going to look like. So a curriculum needs to really identify very particularly where the end goal is, and then measure out a staged series of progressions to get there. And that's what they do. They're a training tool. That's really all they are, and outside of the school that you train in, they really have very limited relevance too, is another thing to bear in mind. In aiming to get to your end point, you really need a series of steps, because you can't just go from 0 to 100 in one jump. It's got to be broken down into a series of components that are achievable. And each of those needs to build on the set that came before it. And ideally, you should have a number of different skill sets moving and improving together at a similar speed, and slowly building on each other and tying in together to give you the cohesive whole of sparring to whatever your style and rule set and objectives are. So, as an example, the curriculum which I teach by is a 5-stage process. Goes from a beginner to a scholar. The names are somewhat arbitrary. They're just names, but the point is that they define specific points along the way. Some curriculums might have as many as 10 stages. I've chosen 5. 5's kind of nice. You don't want the steps to be too big, nor do you want them to be too small. It's a little bit of a subjective measure as to what the difference is between those stages, but as a general rule, on the beginner end, they need to be fairly small and easily achievable and good for quick wins and foundational skill building. And the further along the pathway you progress, you can leave a longer space between one stage and the next, a year, more than a year. There can be quite a lengthy thing, because by the time that people have got to that stage, they're well and truly entrenched in the curriculum and they're committed to it, and they don't really need those quick wins to keep them interested, because they've got then they're understanding really what it is to gain the skill in its own right, and it's more of a pathway than a simple celebration of having reached the next milestone. So I use a 5-step pathway, and the first step is beginners. And here you're really just using really basic things. It's started with a longsword, it's teaching footwork, it's teaching sword handling skills, how to move from one posture to another. Very simple sparring. Everything's just fundamental skills. Sometimes I hear criticism that it's not learning to fight, and that criticism is absolutely correct. At the beginner level, you're not learning to fight, you're learning how to stand up, move around, and basically not fall over yourself. That's what the beginner section of the curriculum does. In the second stage of the curriculum, you're really starting to develop your coordination and begin to apply those basic foundational skills, and have a sense that you don't have to concentrate 100% on every single thing that you're doing all at the same time. They're starting to come together a little bit. And you really, it's more about developing your physical literacy here and building coordination. The movements that you get will be a lot more consistent, they'll be a lot more confident in doing them. And you're really starting to be able to get your body to do what it is that you think it's actually doing. In the curriculum that I use at this stage, we then introduce a second weapon. We introduce the rondelle dagger, and that's designed so that it brings the movement of people closer together. You have to be at obviously a close range to use the dagger, so it sort of forces people's mindsets into closing in and making for a close series of exchanges there, and really developing narrow play techniques. The particular style that I choose, and this is not for everyone's cup of tea, I also like to use a lot of kicks, and because we're using daggers especially, and a lot of focus on narrow play, there's unarmed deflections, and these are a good time to start to introduce these at this second stage of the curriculum. So you can see now you're starting to build a few little bits and pieces around what's come before it. In the third stage of a curriculum, you're really building again on what's come before it, same as jumping from the first to second stage. In that step from second to third, you'll find people are starting to move a lot more fluidly and a lot more confidently, and really it's all about just starting to habituate all of those movements that have come before, and really beginning to apply them and bring a bit of life to them. And really a lot of what it comes down to, it's just applied fundamentals. In this middle stage, it's really applied fundamentals and just repeating basics and basics and basics, so that these movements become habitual and really become kind of reflexive, and they're starting to develop this capacity just to spin out a series of techniques without a huge amount of mental load that's involved in building them. In the curriculum that I teach, I like to introduce the spear at this stage. And that also shifts the distancing again. So in stage one was super basic stuff. In stage two, we introduced the dagger to close everything together. In stage three, we introduced the spear, which kind of stretches out the distancing again. So you can see by introducing new components, in this case weapons, it will shift other components around. And in this example, it will be distancing. So the structure of a curriculum can manipulate its internal components and use those to build a bigger picture. In this middle stage, throughout my own curriculum, I also like to include locks and throws at this stage, more throws than locks. Because your simple throws are they're fairly strong core movements. They feel good, they're exciting, they're hard to pull off in real time, they require a lot of work. They're certainly not the kind of thing that you would take up as a beginner. But they're really interesting, and they're just another way of how do you move your body against your opponent. So that's an example of the kind of things that you're picking up in the middle stages. When people get to the fourth stage of a curriculum, they're really starting to shape it to their own style, and this is a really interesting part. It sounds like it's a very standardized process, but of course everyone's going to move slightly differently. Someone who's really short and stocky will move very differently to someone who's really tall and slender, and one person might be reliant on a lot of strength and force, someone else might have speed on their side, someone else will really focus on precision. Everyone's using the same curriculum, the same pathway and the same steps, but they're developing them towards their own strengths, and you really start to see this by the time people kind of hit about stage 4 of whatever curriculum it is that you're using. So it's not quite the cookie cutter approach that it pretends to be. Like I say, it's a pathway, but each pathway is individual, and once you start to get up to around stage 4, you really start to see these individualities really beginning to be expressed. People at this level can really start to do quite interesting and advanced things. They've got a lot of all the structures that they've been practicing up until now. They're all starting to tie them together and work them together. And can do some really complex stuff. They can do a lot of really fast sparring and looking really sharp and smooth, moving in at all sorts of different ranges and shifting angles and those sorts of things. This is about the stage where I like to start to introduce things like wrist locks. They're the kind of thing that you really need to understand a lot of your fundamentals before you can do them really safely or well. So, it's something of a prize for having made it that far is you get to do increasingly fun and complicated stuff. If you start to show really complicated things to people who don't have those foundational abilities to perform them, then you're kind of setting up accidents to happen. So that's obviously the one thing that you need to avoid. But a well-structured curriculum can take all of this into account, so you can still do things which are potentially dangerous, but because you've taken the steps of progressing people up before they start doing this kind of things, it reduces that quite substantially. And also, by the time people have got to this level, they've got a high degree of awareness as to who they're training with and what their training partners' capabilities are. And they've also got a lot of self-control and the capacity to see that if something is starting to spin out of control and there's an accident, half a second down the road, they can pull things up short and avoid it. There's, they're working with control. They're working with control and speed and defined movements in a practical application. That's really the kinds of things that you want to see in stage 4 of a curriculum, regardless of what style it is, and the details are not so much. The issue here, really what I'm just talking about, is the principles of what you would see at that level of training. By the time somebody reaches stage 5 of a curriculum, which is the last stage here, they're fast, they're reflexive, they're able to act on instinct, and essentially what's happening is all of their movements are as a compilation of reflexive actions. They're really not having to expend a great deal of thought about how they can make an approach or which defense they should be making or how to extract themselves from a bind, or it just happens because they've spent all this time building and progressing, that these things become quite reflexive and mindless, and I'll sort of use that term in its positive sense. They don't have to think through the process of what's going on. They just do it. They're also, people at this stage 5 level really have a really good understanding of basics. The basics all roll out, and this is important because they're still doing basics. You know, the beginners level training, they're still doing beginner levels training, still doing stage 2, stage 3 and stage 4. You don't get to the end of one level and go, hooray, I've done it, I never have to look at that again. You're always going over it again and again and again, because the more you understand the basic level, it's like a pyramid. The bigger your base, the taller your pyramid gets. If your basic level is understanding is this much, you know, you've got a pyramid that high. If your understanding is this much, you go that much higher. So on stage 5, they're really performing complex, fast drills, fighting with extreme intent, can start using any sort of weapon or no weapon, really adaptive and flexible and mobile and fast and graceful and smooth. The very important point to remember about stage 5 and sort of reaching the end of your curriculum is that it's really not the end at all. Once you've got to that point and you've finished it, your objective then is to go over it, run over the whole thing again, and start teaching it to other people. And in teaching it to other people, what then happens is that you improve your own knowledge there, because when you explain something, you learn it twice. So here's a quick review of what we studied today. Curriculum is a staged pathway that helps you move along, where each stage of the curriculum builds on the previous steps, and it takes a number of different strands and adds onto each one and ties them all together into a cohesive whole to move you towards your goal of improved sparring. So you can see it's a whole lot more clearer once you've got a simple plan and how everything fits together. And most of all, it makes you feel better because you always know what you have to do next to help you progress. Regardless of whereabouts you sit, you've always got a plan. And this clarity really helps to become a smooth and a mobile fighter, and it really helps you get a lot more out of your training sessions. You'll make a lot more progress for the amount of time that you spend training. So let me know in the comments below if you use a curriculum, or if you enjoy having curriculums. If you use one, do you like it? If you don't, do you want one? What your thoughts are on curriculums, because it's an interesting topic and a useful one, I think, that all martial artists should contemplate, very much so. So if you found these ideas helpful, then please share them. In the next video, I'll be showing you how to implement what we've learned today in an easier and faster fashion, so that regardless of where you sit on the curriculum pathway, it will be able to help you get past whatever blocks are in your way and keep you focused on reaching your goal of better sparring. So speaking of improved sparring, I've been hearing from people asking about the Fight Like Fiore membership. I'd love to see you there. In the next video, we'll talk more about this program and how you can join it. It's open to the general public, only for a short time, several periods a year. And I do this so that each cluster of new members can move through as a cohesive group, and we can all focus on getting the best results from anyone who's in that membership there. So in taking part in this workshop or in this series of videos, you've already taken several steps to improve your sparring. We've taken a look at foundational footwork as the basis, moved on to applying those in a applied technique through a universal defense, and now we've looked today at how to construct all these various components into a framework to provide you with a clear plan on where you're aiming to get to and how you plan to get there. All of this will help you improve your fighting capabilities, and in the next video I'll be sharing the next step of this journey. Hope to see you there.